Agnes Decker and Peter Daniel are the parents of 3 children, including Johanna. They're grandparents to many, including Ronald Braun, and great-grandparents to dozens, including myself, Gary Braun, and my siblings. This video is about their life. Agnes Decker was the 4th child born to John Decker and Mary Hengel on April 23, 1880, in a small southern Minnesota town called Fremont. John and Mary were both immigrants from Luxembourg who came over to the U.S. in 1868, and they married in 1875. A land plat map shows that John Decker had 160 acres on the northern part of Fremont. The previous 3 children born to John and Mary were Susan and Anna, who were twins born in 1878, and then Barbara, born a year later. The 1880 U.S. Census shows the small family living in Fremont. John and Mary as the parents, with Susan, Anna, Barbara, and Agnes as the newborn. While Mary was pregnant with the couple's 5th child, and while Agnes was just 1 year old, older sister Barbara passed away. Later that year, Jacob was born, and a year after that, Katie was born. In 1886, the couple had their 2nd son, Theodore, but he died just 7 months later while Agnes was 6. The family added on another son, Nicholas, in 1887, but then tragedy struck later in the year when both Susan and Anna passed away just 1 month apart. Agnes, having lost all 3 of her older sisters, was now the oldest child in the family. In January of 1888, the Daniel family experienced one of the worst tragedies in the Midwest. It had been a rough winter in the area, but January 12th started off as a beautiful day with above average temperatures. But by the afternoon, the temperatures dropped and the winds picked up tremendously, and people were stuck in the cold. The weather changed so quickly that people were caught by surprise. The biggest victims were the school children, who got caught in the bad weather on their way home from school, many without jackets. In all, 235 people died, including 213 school children across the Midwest. From 1893 to 1896, the U.S. was in the middle of a huge depression. Unemployment rose to 25%, which affected people in all parts of the country. The Reading Railroad went bankrupt, and many were homeless. President Grover Cleveland was largely blamed for the depression. During those years, the family added Frank, John, and Michael, and in 1895, the U.S. Census still shows them living in Fremont. However, in 1900, possibly due to the tough economic times, the family is still in Fremont, but now Agnes was living as a servant in the home of Margaret Shaw, a widow from Scotland, who lived with her 3 children. 4 years later, Agnes married Peter Daniel on September 4th, 1904, in Rolling Stone, Minnesota. Peter was born in nearby Norton, Minnesota, on February 6, 1882. He was 2 years younger than Agnes. Peter was also from a large family, and he was the 5th child born to George Daniel from Ohio and Teresa Braun from Bavaria. Peter was preceded by siblings John, Susie, Ida, and a child who was born and died prematurely. And then Peter's parents had 4 more children after Peter over the next 11 years. This included Lizzie, Maria, Anna, and Leo. Peter lived with his family on the farm in Norton until marrying Agnes in Rolling Stone in 1904. The 1905 census, just a year after they were married, shows that Peter and Agnes were living with Peter's father, George, and his family. Shortly after that, the couple gave birth to their first child, Vincent, and a year later another son, Cornelius. The following year, in 1907, while Agnes was pregnant with the couple's third child, Peter fell ill with pneumonia and passed away on April 23rd. That was Agnes's 27th birthday. The newspaper reported the following. The funeral for Peter Daniel took place Thursday from the Catholic Church. Reverend Father Schmitz conducted the service. Peter Daniel was the son of George Daniel and was born and reared in Rolling Stone. He attended parochial school, after which he took up farm work with his parents. In September 1904, he was married to Miss Agnes Decker of Fremont, which union was such but a few years. As of Wednesday of last week, he complained of feeling ill, which turned out to be pneumonia, and ended his suffering on Tuesday morning at the age of 25 years and 2 months. He leaves a young wife and 2 children, his parents, 5 sisters, 2 brothers, and many dear friends who will miss him greatly. The Winona Republican Herald, April 1907. 5 months later, Agnes gave birth to their daughter, Johanna, which was born on September 27th, 1907. Now at the age of 27, Agnes was a widow with 3 children that were 3 years old or younger and probably did not have much money. A year later, Agnes married Peter Schell of Rolling Stone. Peter was born in 1879, a year older than Agnes, and was familiar to her. Peter's sister Mary had married the brother of Peter Daniel. A year after marrying, the couple was living in Rolling Stone, and they gave birth to their own child, John Bernard Schell, who was later known in life as Ben. And 3 years after that, the couple had another child, Evelyn Mary Schell, later known in life as Tootie. The next few years were a dynamic time for the couple. In 1917, the United States entered the Great War, later known as World War I, and many Minnesotans volunteered. In 1919, Agnes lost her father, John Decker, at the age of 68. That same year, Agnes gave birth to her last child, Anthony Peter Schell, later known as Tony. Following that, Prohibition began with the passing of the 18th Amendment, and in 1920, Agnes was able to vote for the first time with the passing of the 19th Amendment. The next decade or so were relatively stable for Agnes and Peter Schell. World events included Prohibition ending in 1933, 14 years after it started, and the U.S. entering World War II in 1941 with the bombing of Pearl Harbor. The 1940 census shows Agnes and Peter living by themselves in Rushford Township. Ron Braun is the grandson of Agnes Decker and remembers his time down on the farm in Rushford with Agnes and Peter.
My mother were in it. There was a story on that farm in Rushford, or Rolling Stone. It was real near Rushford. There was a barn. You want to go into this now?
Sure.
Okay. They used to let me drive the horses. Everything was horse-drawn. They didn't have any tractors at the time. So they used to let me drive the horses. Of course, they were holding the reins, and I was just hanging on to it. But they would bring the load of hay up on a side hill, so that they could have the thing come down from the hay mow, grab the hay, and put it back up for the horses and the animals. And I was sitting on the wagon, and it was, instead of turning it this way, they turned it this way, and it tipped over with me on top of it. And my head came down. It was a stone foundation barn, all flagstone. It wasn't even brick. And there was openings periodically for windows, but there was no windows in them. They were just openings, and inside them were the stables where the horses were. My head came down and just missed and went into one of those openings, right in a stone opening. And I looked up, and I was like 4 years old, and it scared the heck out of me. And I looked up, and there's a horse about that far away from me. And apparently I learned from I said, "Get me the hell out of here." And that was, and everybody was marveling at the fact that I didn't get hurt on that deal. And I remember one thing from the house in Rolling Stone. She had a parlor, and we weren't allowed in there because that was the most beautiful. There was wax fruit and beautiful pictures and beautiful furniture and everything, and it was just like, oh my God, the door's open. What's going on in there? You know, and it was kind of an interesting. We used to try to sneak in and see what was going on, but the rest of the house was a regular farmhouse. But that room was set off that this was Grandma and Grandpa's, almost like their set area. Well, I've seen pictures of her in her 20s, and she was a very beautiful lady. But as I saw her in her 80s, I just thought this was what a grandma looked like. She was kind of shriveled and old and wrinkled and kind of moved around slow. Probably no more than 5'1", 5'2", but just the nicest lady. And she spoke German and English, and she's taught me various different German phrases. And to this day, I still remember some of them. Lusty Bunsen, Nick Bison, don't let the bed bugs bite, and stuff like. And that every night it was like good night, good Nacht, good night, schlaf gut, sleep well. Lusty Bunsen, Nick Bison, don't let the bed bugs bite. Yeah, I just barely remember him as a figure that was there. I remember him tossing him in the air, and he was at the farm, but I don't remember. I don't have a lot of memories of that.
Then, on September 11th, 1942, at the age of 63, Peter Schell suffered a heart attack and died on their farm in Rushford. Agnes was 62 now, and for the second time, she was a widow.
And she moved into a little trailer, probably no more than 12 or 14 foot long, a little house trailer, and they put that with her kids, Neil and Susan and Anthony. They put it on her property, and she lived there. And during the summer, either I was in Kellogg with the one side of the family, or in Stockton, where this was located, with the others. And we used to stay, three of us, my mom and I, would stay in that trailer with Grandma.
Agnes lived out the last 23 years of her life with her son-in-law and her daughter, Ed and Tootie Verdick, in Minnesota City. On October 28, 1965, Agnes Schell passed away at the age of 85 at the Community Memorial Hospital after a brief illness. Agnes and Peter Schell are buried next to each other at the Holy Trinity Cemetery in Rolling Stone, Minnesota.